This episode is brought to you by Amazon Prime. There's nothing sweeter than baking cookies during the holidays. With Prime, I get all my ingredients delivered right to my door, fast and free, no last-minute store trips needed. And of course, I blast my favorite holiday playlist on Amazon Music. It's the ultimate soundtrack for creating unforgettable memories. From streaming to shopping, it's on Prime. Visit Amazon.com/Prime to get more out of whatever you're into.
You're listening to What She Said with me, Candace Sampson, and this is your weekly reminder to take up big space in life, laugh loudly, absorb new knowledge, and continue to grow and expand. What She Said is your space for the big conversations that matter and the little joys that make life sweeter. This is where empowerment meets self-care and mansplaining has no seat at the table. So grab a coffee, get comfy, and let's jump into it because life's too short not to embrace the good stuff while we tackle the tough stuff. Like I said, nobody is more surprised to me that I am a huge fan of Celine Dion now. And so that...
Look, I get it. If you had told 15-year-old me that I would be like prepared to like die for her, I'd be like, no, what are you talking about? You mean if I'm already dead? Like, yeah, no. But it's one of my great joys, actually, that this is now how I feel. I'm just like, I will go into battle for this one. Like, I want good things for her because I really genuinely believe that she really wants good things for like the world.
That's Andrea Warner, and in today's show, we go deep discussing her book, We Ought to Know, How 4 Women Ruled the 90s and Changed Canadian Music. Andrea isn't afraid to tackle big questions, from what music means in our lives to how it shapes culture and identity. Her work goes far beyond the surface of pop culture, digging into the ways artists, and especially women, confront and challenge societal norms. She's the author of several books, including The Time of My Life, Dirty Dancing, and Rise Up and Sing, Power, Protest, and Activism in Music. Her passion for music, activism, and feminism is deeply intertwined in everything she does, making her a perfect guest for today's conversation. This episode is more than a trip down memory lane. It's about the transformative power of women in music, their resilience, and the way their struggles and victories reflect our struggles and victories. In a time when conversations about equality, representation, and activism are more critical than ever, Andrea's insights remind us how music connects us and gives voice to our collective experiences. Let's hear what she said. I want to start at the very, very beginning, which is your dedication, because your book is dedicated to all women addressing their internalized misogyny. And right away, you had me. You immediately had me.
Thanks. Yeah, we're a large group. It's there's a lot of us.
Well, so timely, really. We're recording this obviously in November 2024, and this is an incredibly timely conversation. So why was it important for you to open the book with that message? And what does it mean to you personally?
I originally released this book in 2015. I was almost 10 years younger. It was kind of written at a slightly different time, and yet on the cusp of a lot of what was about to happen a couple years away from that. And now here we are again. And just trying to understand how we find ourselves back in this particular place, but worse on some levels, and more deeply committed to kind of like a very internalized hatred. I didn't want it to be a reflection of that, but I felt it was a reflection of that. And I mean, I had lots of different hopes while I was, sort of updating this book. I added 20,000 words. I was revisiting things that I, things I had researched, things I had written, and obviously, things have changed, and there's always progress, as well as sort of regression, because that is life. But I finished all of the sort of edits for this book, like the hard edits, like all of like the final draft was done earlier this year. So we weren't in the exact place that we are at this moment. but I do feel like I was writing towards it on some level. It's just really tough to be right here, right now. And I've had a lot of opportunity in the last like 12 years to become more aware of like my own complicity in a lot of these structures that like my whiteness and my cisgender like womanhood, like all of these things uphold. And so, yeah, that I think like I wasn't sure how I wanted to dedicate it, but I ultimately decided that like it all of the people who are like wanting to talk about that stuff and wanting to try and do the work and like wanting to try and unpack it, like I wanted us all to feel a little bit together in that effort.
And you really, honestly, you unpack it in this book. So We Ought to Know is about obviously these wonderful female Canadian musicians that we're going to get to in a second. But more so, it's really about our relationship with them, I think, and how it's changed over the years and how you can look back on it so differently. And I really felt that. And you, as you mentioned, you originally published this book in 2015, decided to re-examine and expand on it this year. And earlier in the book, you mentioned that you're angrier than you've ever been.
Yeah.
So what's fueling your anger right now?
Oh, I mean, everything. Like I will, one of the things that I had never thought about originally when I was writing this book is that we would be on the other side of, sort of, and again, I understand that this is in America, but it impacts us globally and affects us in Canada as well.
Absolutely.
But just on the other side of Roe v. Wade being overturned, on this sort of precipice of upending of, sort of a lot of human rights and civil rights and civil protections that have been enshrined in the States, and how that spillover is happening here. I'm very, very angry at TERFs. I'm extremely angry at this incredible amount of racialized violence, specifically and including Black people, Indigenous people, the police brutality that is part of that epidemic. And, I'm also very angry at the ways in which certain people have just opened up about their fascist right-wing leanings and are free to just float that. Like, I do feel like there used to be like a bit of shame if you were like that.
Well, if you shone a light on them, they went back to the corners, right?
I thought that. And I mean, that. Again, I could be like just absolutely living in my privilege there by like saying that, like, I do feel like, yeah, I just feel like there's a lot to be extremely angry about right now. I think my responsibility personally is I have to like use that anger for something good and hopeful, and to uplift other people and amplify other people, and hopefully not like hide in my own cowardice and my own safety.
And a lot of the times that hope we're looking for comes through music. It was funny listening to this book, how much it triggered floods of memories for me. And I was talking about it with my girlfriends this past weekend. We'll get into it a little bit later, but absolutely. I was talking about sort of how I was excited to talk to you about this book and the women you profile, just because it did bring back such a flood of memories, like really intense feelings that I felt at the time, especially with Jagged Little Pill. So we'll get into that. So, okay. So the 90s were such a transformative decade for music, obviously. So what kind of music defined your identity during the time?
Oh, God. I mean, I think I even break it down mathematically at some point in the book, but like, for sure, I really thought I was like, just 62% Alanis Morissette and like 38% Sarah. And I wasn't like performatively angsty, but I definitely had a relationship in my brain to like wanting to own sort of the label of artist more than I did, like I was already a writer. I'd been writing poetry since I was like in grade 5. I was writing like long form books by hand, like really sappy sort of teen romance kind of things by hand, like 500-page things that I named like Carly's Saga, stuff like that. So that's who I wanted to be. I will say I never had a boy band phase when I was little. I went straight to Roxette when I was in like grade 5, and I stayed there till about like grade 8, and then came in like Sarah McLachlan and Hole and a few other things, and then Alanis, and she really sort of just seized me. Like I didn't even put together at that time that she had been the dance pop Alanis that I had heard previously. Like
right.
when
I remember that as well.
I didn't put it together. Like I knew those songs. And I mean, I listened to like a lot of my parents' music as well, like here and there. And I was reading our Canadian textbook in school had a big section where they would gather poems, or I thought they were poems. I didn't realize that they were by like famous songwriters as well, but like poems by like Joni Mitchell and Leonard Cohen and Janice Ian and all of these people. And then, and so I was reading these and just loving them. And then when I discovered that it was also music, I was able to sort of like go in that way. But yeah, Alanis, I think was the person who I just like all of the torment of being 15, because it really is a torment, honestly, no matter like who you are and what's going on in your life. 13 to 15, I think, is like kind of the messiest, ugliest ages that you can often be, just hormonally and like all these kinds of things. And I felt like Alanis Morissette and Jagged Little Pill sort of spoke to the spectrum, like the fullest spectrum of my existence, because there was joy, there was rage, there was sort of this yearning and this angst, but like there was also a lot of humor. And even then I really I liked humor in my music, as well as those sort of like bigger emotional swings as well. Anyway, that's the longest answer to that question you could possibly ask for. So sorry. But yeah, that's where I was. And I was like just vehemently against Celine Dion and Shania Twain.
Well, I have to tell you, I laughed out loud at one point in the book, because you said you would claimed you had more discerning taste, and then you said, okay, oh, actually, I was just judgmental.
Yeah,
which I thought was really brilliant, because just admitting that, because we do that, right? And I thought that was cool.
Especially like as a teenager, like you kind of always want to think that like the thing that you love is the thing that's more authentic or real, or like, I don't know, just good. Like, and we think about like highbrow taste versus lowbrow taste. And we think about like, I guess probably a lot of the magazines that I would have been reading about at the time that were about music also sort of fed into this idea that, certain things were cool and certain things were not cool. And I was already deeply uncool on one level, I have to admit. Like, so I was always into soap operas. Like I was always into soap operas. I was the child who took their allowance to go and buy Soap Opera Weekly, and I had a preference for Soap Opera Weekly over Soap Opera Digest. This is behavior that I had since I was like 10 years old. I was also buying Entertainment Weekly when I could, and like Premiere Magazine, all of these different things that I really loved. I loved writing and thinking about arts and entertainment. And I didn't really personally make a distinction between daytime television, nighttime television, and the big screen. And I didn't really make a lot of those distinctions musically until it sort of became about boy bands and adult contemporary and country pop. Like that's where I sort of started to live my own sort of like inner critic, but like it's really just a matter of taste. It's not actually a criticism. It's just whether you like it or not.
This is actually a perfect spot to jump in on Celine Dion, because
oh yes,
you've had a very complicated relationship with Celine Dion. That really comes through, I got to tell you. And I think a lot of people,
thank you so much.
I think a lot of people have. I think she's really been one of these sort of, entertainers that you either love or love to hate. And especially during the 90s. For me, I've never been a massive fan of her. And I will probably touch on this in a little bit, but where do you stand now when it comes to Celine Dion?
Well, now I feel like I would die for her. Like it's really come a long way. Like I love her with, and that's not to say that I love all of her music, because I don't. It's just some of it I adore. Some of it is never going to be my jam. But I love her persona and the way that she lives her life publicly. Because obviously I don't know her, intimately, or as a person in real life. But what she presents to us, I think, is this earnestness that was not fashionable and was frankly like extremely sort of almost like dissonant to the culture of the 90s,
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like as I've gotten so much more appreciative of people's quirks and vulnerabilities and earnestness, like there's nothing honestly better to me than someone who like is unabashedly awkward and kind of a little bit weird and funny and dorky, and also just still so like obviously talented.
Yeah.
Like I just so now, it's a whole different relationship that I have, I think, to a more full portrait of her as a human being. I think in the 90s, when again, like, when you're revisiting work, especially when you're like reading the book, because I narrated the audiobook.
Right.
And so when you're reading it out loud and you're saying some of these things that you've written to two virtual strangers, like your artistic director and your sound engineer, and you have to sort of like own these horrible things that you kind of written.
It's different when you're saying it out loud.
It is different when you're saying it out loud. And I mean, I say that as someone who as part of my editing process reads every iteration out loud, because like that's important to me as a writer, to make sure that it sounds good in my voice, in my space. But like saying it to an audience is so different. But I still stood by I still stood by every word, because I think like one of the phrases that I wrote in the book is like, I'm gentle with my foolishness. Like I'm not mad at my young self. I'm like, but I want to hold her accountable. So like I still stand by a lot of the criticisms that I have of like certain songs and certain techniques and things that I don't think work very well. But like the love that I have for a song like It's All Coming Back to Me Now, which I've always loved that song, like that has, I think, blossomed into that fuller picture of Celine. And so now I'm like eating up every single sort of piece of content that relates to her. I am here for. I am eager. I am very hopeful that she is able to resume performing if that's what she wants to do, because I would immediately fly to Las Vegas to just try and sit in like, I don't know, the back row just to experience it.
It's funny because so her music is does still not resonate with me. Still not. And
sure, fair enough.
But that being said, my feelings towards her have changed so significantly. And I feel like there's a little bit of a comparison with Taylor Swift currently.
Oh, yeah.
That people who don't embrace Taylor Swift still love her outside of the music. Yeah. And that is where I'm sort of sit with Celine Dion right now. Her music, again, I sort of agree with where you were too sappy, too earnest, was never like, I could never imagine just putting on Celine Dion to listen to.
Yeah.
But her persona now, the documentary, seeing her, that little clip with Adele recently that went viral, the way she's handled, having stiff person syndrome and all of this, and just the way she's sort of presented herself. She is funny. She does make fun of herself. She does all of those things just make her, to me, a very exceptional human, even though I don't like the music. And I like that. I like that now, because before I sort of just really just shoved her into this sort of all or nothing sort of place. And now my respect for her is much bigger. Even though the music may not be my jam, as you would say. Right. So I love that about Celine Dion, that she's really just grown into this sort of fuller character before our eyes.
Yeah. I think like, she was sort of like this pop culture caricature a long time ago. And I think she has become like so much more real. Like and I think, maybe part of that is sort of age and like how the culture shifts and things like that. I mean, I think also just sort of watching her navigate the loss of her husband and sort of step into herself as sort of this really sort of like independent person. Like, I mean, she does talk about how it's not just her, like there's a whole team behind her, and she makes a lot of space for that, especially in the documentary, which I really appreciated. But I mean, also sort of, I think like seeing her step into herself as the fashion icon that she always hoped and aspired to be, that is the biggest cultural shift that we had with Celine sort of in the 2010s. And I feel like that did something, because she was talking about all the interviews that she was doing in addition to like serving look after look after look,
right,
especially like with La Roche and like what they built together. All the interviews that she was doing, I think she was really expressing herself in a way that she hadn't before. And I think that did a lot to sort of expand our understanding of her as a real human being. Like we do have a bit of this like fame culture, and it's a bit different now with influencer stuff, but like she's always been willing to sort of let us inside, but now she has really opened up herself to like being and owning her position in pop culture and in the culture. And I think that sort of changes our relationship with her.
Yeah, I agree. Like I said, nobody is more surprised to me that I am a huge fan of Celine Dion now. And so that,
look, I get it.
Yeah.
If you had told 15-year-old me that I would be like prepared to like die for her, I'd be like, no, what are you talking about? Like, you mean if I'm already dead? Like, yeah, no, but it's one of my great joys, actually, that this is now how I feel. I'm just like, I will go into battle for this woman. Like, I want good things for her, because I really genuinely believe that she really wants good things for like the world. You know what I mean? Like, yeah.
I agree. All right, let's move on to Alanis, because
All right.
this is a big one for me. So Jagged Little Pill sold 33 million copies, tackled themes of patriarchy, misogyny, sexual abuse, well before Me Too, well before it. And you were 15, I was 26. And
important ages,
yeah,
honestly, like especially in the culture.
So for me, it was like a fire in my brain. It was like somebody gave me permission to be furious. And I had never, ever, ever, like, I'm getting tears in my eyes. I'm telling you, I was talking about this with my girlfriends on the weekend, and when just flooded with all of these feelings when that album came out. Because by that point in my life, I had dealt with sexual abuse, misogyny, sexism, and even a stalker. And so that album gave me an outlet for all of my rage and permission to express it. And until that point, that was something that I had not heard in music yet. I don't know if it existed before, but her album really just sort of, that was a huge. What did it mean to you at 15? You mentioned a little bit about that was an angsty period, the teen years.
Yeah.
But for me, as an adult, essentially, it was really big.
Some nice, like I've always been sort of grateful to grow up in a time of Alanis Morissette. And I think about that in relationship to what you're talking about, like being 15 and understanding that I had permission to feel all the things, and not just like quietly, but like I could feel them out loud.
Right.
And I did not need to care who was upset about that. Like, you know, like I'm so lucky. And like, you know, I think that like that's a really big sort of shift for so many people, and especially countless women across countless generations, is the first person that makes you feel like it's okay to be angry, whoever that is for you, and like however that happens for you. That's life changing. Like that cements something inside you and unlock something inside you that hopefully you can hold on to for the rest of your life. And I know that that's not the case for everyone.
Yeah.
And it comes at different times and in different ways. And I do think like Alanis gave us, like, I think like the angry piece of that for sure. And like the rage and the confusion that comes along with rage that can fuel rage, the joy and pleasure that can also fuel rage, you know, like I feel like this idea that in the press often is that like they reduce anger to like one simple thing. And I just think it's so much more nuanced than that. And so I think like when we're finding someone who understands how complex our anger really is, and like that it's not just like one thing, that it is, God, it's so many things. Like the number of times I have angry cried just so I don't like, I don't know, explode on somebody and like harm somebody else or self-harm or like whatever. Yeah. Like the catharsis that comes through Jagged Little Pill, and it does, and like it tells so many different stories, and you feel that it borrows from her life, but you also feel that it borrows from like kind of witnessing a lot of things, growing up in sort of some slightly oppressive environments in terms of sort of religious upbringing, and then obviously like child star kind of upbringing. Like there are so many different sort of like structures that she was in that have ideas about how you're supposed to behave and conduct yourself as a girl, and never affording you any agency. And like us, like having to claim our agency is, I mean, I think it's something that, I don't know, I think it's something that I'm still working towards every single day.
Oh, absolutely. It's an ongoing process.
Yeah. Like it's not like one and done. And I feel like, you know, Alanis, for a lot of people, she was like one of the first that like made us realize that we could. And I think she was, you know, just the fact that like people, some of the press at the time was talking about how like she was sort of manufactured or inauthentic or whatever. But like, you cannot listen to Jagged Little Pill back to front and not feel that this is a record about personal liberation.
Absolutely.
And, you know, just tearing down oppressive structures. Like I always think about like how especially wild the choice is. Like obviously like my book's called We Ought to Know, and the song You Ought to Know starts the record, but then also bookends the record, and then we get to the secret song. And like, do you know of it? Like I honestly, I'm sure that I'm sure I could look this up, but like I don't know of many records that where the like track list starts and ends with the same song and then gives you this little break and then moves into like a song as effective as that hidden track. Like, I don't know. I think like there's something pretty genius about that structure. And that's why it's even more resonant for us, because we understand that it's a record that tells us that this is a circle. It's all feeding into us. Every single song moves into.
And you mentioned the press there, which is really interesting, because I remember being
and this is the story
like
of
we
like
ride at dawn for Alanis about this, because it was actually almost the perfect response, the expected response from the critics.
Yeah.
You know, they sort of reduced it to, you know, I'm putting in quotes here, a catalog of grievances or talk radio pop. And it was almost like you just ran into the point of this whole album, you know, face first into the point.
This episode is brought to you by AWS. Amazon Q Business is the new generative AI assistant from AWS. Many tasks can make business slow, like wading through mud. Help! Luckily, there's a faster, easier, less messy choice. Amazon Q can securely understand your business data to help you streamline tasks, like summarizing quarterly results or doing complex analyses in no time. Q got this. Learn what Amazon Q Business can do for you at aws.com/learn more.
This is what you do when you've just found that statement handbag on eBay and you want to build an entire wardrobe around it. You start selling to keep buying. Yep, on eBay. Over that all-black everything phase? List it and buy all the color. Feeling more vintage than ever? It's out with the new and in with the pre-loved. Next thing you know, you've refreshed your wardrobe basically without spending a dime. Yeah, eBay, the place to buy and sell new, pre-loved, vintage, and rare fashion.
That's the wild thing so often. Don't you find that like you're reading something and someone says, well, what's the point of this? And then the answer really is, this is the point of this. Like, you not understanding why it's important is actually the point. And I know that sort of sometimes oversimplifies it, but like truly the ways in which so many critics reveal their own ignorance and their own complicity in why this record matters.
Exactly. That's it. Like, it was insane. It was insane. I mean, audiences everywhere were lapping this up. It was like a huge album. Women were, lifted up and empowered. It was so great. And then on the other side, you have all these critics going and like just dismissing it and poo-pooing it, which was infuriating, but also a little bit funny.
Yeah, like I think for sure in retrospect, I like, especially like in sort of like combing through all the research and reading everything that was written about it at the time. And I mean, some of it I remember because I was reading those articles at the time. But like when you compile it all together and you lay it out flat, my God, like how much stock can we really give the rock critic canon?
Oh, I want to go off on a tangent here for a second, if we might.
Yeah.
Because you mentioned, how do we say his name? Is it Jan Wiener? John Wiener?
Yeah. No, that sounds good.
Wiener?
You know what? Jan Wiener is great.
Let's go with that.
He doesn't deserve to be
the
Jan
Rolling
Wiener.
Stone guy. Like, this guy ran Rolling Stone for how long? Like, I don't even know.
Forever.
Yeah.
Forever.
And
He founded it.
And he is literally the most misogynistic, racist man on earth. And this shaped the music industry for decades.
Yep.
I mean, that is infuriating when you think about it. I mean, this book he wrote with the top artists, not one black artist, not one woman. Wild.
Yeah. Masters, he calls it. Yeah. And I think when people, I think in positions like that, because like as we always say, it's not just him, but it's a bunch of others as well. But yeah, in general, like when you look at the overwhelming evidence of who the gatekeepers have been, they've been telling on themselves the entire time. Yeah. And, obviously like a lot of people know that. We can find so many interviews with artists who were sort of talking to more independent presses and talking about the obvious sort of racism and sexism and homophobia in mainstream music outlets. And they were telling us the whole time. And like, sometimes you do have to see the magnitude of it all to sort of fully understand and appreciate just how much erasure and how much has been sort of forcibly kept out, and didn't like just the idea that this man is still saying the same thing in, I think it was 2023 was that quote. Good riddance to this man.
Oh my God. Yeah, absolutely. And, I think too, because you mentioned this in the book, which I think is interesting, and I think a lot of people don't know this, is that collectively, Celine Dion, Sarah McLachlan, Shania Twain, Celine, they sold more records than Nickelback, Michael Jackson, and the Beatles in Canada in the 90s. And I think people don't know that. And I think that is a really freaking incredible record to have.
That was the sort of thing that sort of blew my mind. And like when I stumbled upon that list in like 2013 or 2014 or 2013 or 2014 is when I first saw that list. And they still were like Celine, Shania, Alanis, and Sarah were, 4 of the best-selling artists in Canada. They were also the 4 Canadian best-selling artists in Canada, bigger than the Beatles in terms of like record sales. Diana Krall was number 10 on the list at the time. And that list for sure stayed the same for at least like, God, I don't know exactly when it changed. And they don't really list it like that still, but like for a number of years in the 2010s, that list was sort of how they measured record sales on that level. And obviously like part of that is just like people were buying whole albums at the time. So we like, we give that its due, but it does not in any way sort of negate the actual power that these 4 women had as musicians and as best-selling artists. But like, it struck me so much that there were no other Canadian artists on that list other than Diana Krall, and that they had outpaced people so dramatically. And just like that kind of seismic cultural sales impact, like those are the things that often we're told like women don't sell as well as men. And like there's literal statistical sales record evidence that is simply not true, or that like people don't want to listen to women back to back on the radio, or like all these old fashioned ridiculous nonsense things that like you hear these notions and you're just like, what is this? Like, is this like the 50s? Like what's happening? And you realize that that's still some guiding principles for the way that a lot of these power holders still conduct their businesses with this like misguided notions. And if like it really was just about capitalism, then this would not be the case. Like we know that capitalism is only part of the lie. We know that sexism and racism are the other components.
Absolutely.
Because if it was just about capitalism and making money, they would try to make their money. But they don't want to. They also want to like ensure that the like genius is a construct of like white male cisgender superiority.
So where do you think Alanis Morissette sits in the scheme of things now? I know my daughters, for example, have recently discovered her, and I'm like, yes, girl, tap into that anger. Get that. But where does she sit now? Where do you think, how do you think, in 20 years we'll look back on her influence for even today's artists?
Well, I think we're seeing it so clearly in Olivia Rodrigo and Jessie Reyez, and I think we see it in Taylor too. Yeah. Like Taylor's written some real like scorched earth kind of, some things. But and again, not just like the claiming of rage, but the claiming of all the complicated human emotions that like don't always make sense inside ourselves, and like sort of pour out, But I feel like. Yeah, I feel like Jessie Reyez and Olivia Rodrigo taking like I think the quote is she wants to use her mic. I think that's what she said in one of the interviews. And so she's calling out choosing to be told how to behave and what to do, and sort of freeing themselves from that tyranny of sort of like very specific sexism, and not just sexism, but like predatory sort of behavior. And I think one of my favorite things about Jessie is she's sort of taking all of the gatekeepers in the industry in all of the different ways that they gatekeep. And she has publicly tried to ask her label to be accountable for being the change that they allegedly want to see, So I think it takes a lot of guts. Not to borrow from like Olivia Rodrigo's album name, but like truly, like I see them as people who are wanting to sort of do some of that work. And I mean, I see it in Chappell Roan too now. Like I see it in Billie Eilish. Like there's so many folks I think who, are inspired by that like that, it's cliche obviously, but like it's the soundtrack of our lives is Jagged Little Pill. And like, especially now that it's in musical form and becoming like a touring musical. And I really like the touring musical. I saw it on Broadway in previews and I loved it so much. And like, it lends itself to still being, unfortunately, a catalog of the issues facing so many of us.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially now.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Sarah McLachlan.
Yeah.
This is an interesting one because I think, unfortunately, Sarah McLachlan has been reduced to a bit of a meme with the In the Arms of an Angel. I see it everywhere.
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure.
I feel kind of bad for Sarah McLachlan in that regard because, but really she was huge. Lilith Fair was massive. So in hindsight, how significant do you think Lilith Fair was? And why do you think it faced so much pushback at the time as sort of this girly, gathering, really, when it was really not that? It was really a huge force.
Yeah, I think, again, that idea that like it's earnest and cheesy, and if you are a woman with a guitar, you are sort of somehow less capable of complex expression than a man with a guitar. It's weird how the gender binary apparently is just so alive in singer-songwriter culture. But fascinating. I feel like Lilith Fair was honestly seismic. We're still sort of just seeing sort of like that legacy. It kind of like, I understand why it was 3 years, and then Sarah felt that she had to sort of like put this wrap on it and start the rest of her life, and I completely get that. But I think what we see now is how, if you decide that this is a niche, and apparently in a lot of industry stuff, women are niches, music industry stuff, you can make a change. It can be hugely successful, have this massive impact, and then it can just so quickly go away. But I think the seeds are there. And I think that's what we're seeing is like all of this sort of like pushback often about music festivals that have just horrendous gender equality numbers, and like, the first woman to headline a 3-day festival in 25 years of its history, like all of those kinds of headlines, those are happening, I think, in part as like sort of that there's been a generation that was seated on this idea that like an all women or a women focused music festival is not just possible, but profitable and can drive good things in community. And so like, I think we see Brandi Carlile has talked so much about how
I love Brandi Carlile, by the way.
Yeah.
Love her. Saw her open for Pink. She's so great.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah.
But like how transformative Lilith Fair was for her and sort of how she wanted to approach her career and the things that she is now sort of like spearheading. So she does this like music festival every year that's women focused in Mexico. It's like 3 days at a resort, and it's a one-off thing, but like we also have seen how she sort of then has expanded that to, she's got like this 3-day weekend every year at the Gorge. Is she like her touring, the artists that she is amplifying, the people that she's doing that work for. Brandi Carlile is sort of really picking up that mantle, and Sarah has been involved with her on some things, and like, we see that. And so, and obviously like we can't ask one person to have changed the world, but I think she has done something that is helping to change the world. Now, I do also think that there's like, and I talk about this a little bit in the book about just like the limitations of white feminism are, I think, extremely clear in Lilith Fair, and in even still how it's talked about to a certain extent to this day, which is, there wasn't a lot of genre diversity or racial diversity, on the stages. And when Sarah and the two other organizers, her managers at the time, Terry McBride and I can't remember the other guy's name right now off the top of my head, but anyway, I think maybe Mike Diamond. Anyway, when they're asked about it, they have like very kind of like defensive responses that are a bit inadequate, I think, like with 25 years after the fact, where they need to say like, yeah, you know what? These are the people who said yes because we did not build relationships with artists of color and across different genres. And we just expected that people would be grateful that we asked them to play. Yeah. And that's not good enough. That's not like, that's putting so much, it's a really, that's kind of like the most sour look, I think, like 25 years later, is that they still feel defensive when they're asked that question of like, why wasn't Lilith Fair more diverse? And they still always try to put the onus back on artists of color. And I think that is trash. And, and I would, I believe that there's like a better way to do that.
Like own it, like own it. Like I don't understand that. Yeah. Like, it's been 25 years. You can own it. You can say like, we fucked up,
Yeah,
you can say that.
People are so reticent to like own the fact that they screw up. And like, and I just feel like, I mean, a lot of it I think does come from like just that white people being afraid to acknowledge that we have like internal bias and we have like internalized white supremacy that we have to like unpack and do something about, like it's, anyway. So I think like there's a lot of really wonderful stuff about Lilith Fair's legacy. And I'm very excited about the oral histories that have happened and like the documentary that's coming and stuff. But I also think like there's this piece. It's important that we acknowledge and that we still reckon with, because I think it is important into how we move forward to maybe creating, a sort of Lilith Fair 3.0.
Your next book, Andrea, your next book. Okay, let's talk about Shania, because I think you and I have very different feelings on Shania. Again, we were at different stages of our lives. You were sort of 15, that's a hard time for embracing your self-image, your body, and all of that. I was 26. I was like, I had a banging body. I was out there showing it everywhere, right? Like, and I can even say that out loud now. I never would have said that at 26. I still would have not thought it. But at 55, looking back, man, I wish I had that body. I wish I walked around half naked more often. I really...
I guess, that's the thing. I do think that once you get older, you never look back and say, I wished I was less naked when I was younger.
Yeah.
I don't think that anyone ever says that.
I should have been half naked a lot more often. And when I think about Shania Twain, it was funny because Alanis really again, allowed me to tap into that anger. But for Shania, it was like, yeah, own your sexiness, and I always viewed her story. I really embraced her story. She lost her parents. She left her career to raise her siblings. She, this rags to riches, marrying Mutt Lange, the divorce from Mutt Lange, marrying the ex. Like, it was crazy. And at every step of the way, I always wanted to cheer her on. I just loved her.
Yeah. No, that's good. And that's where I'm at now for sure.
Yeah.
Like, it just took me a little extra time. I think like, there's, part of it definitely is like the body image stuff of just like, I've literally just always been a fat kid, and I was always told my body was bad, and it was, and like, not just like bad, like morally, or as if there was like a failure somewhere. It's just like bad as in like, it was ugly and not perfect and all these things. And like it never destroyed me, because frankly, if you grow up with like idolizing Miss Piggy, like you just, I borrowed her confidence and just stayed in that for like my whole life. And I'm grateful for that. But I think like this idea that I really clung to when I was 14 or 15 is that like we could move beyond bodies. We did not have to, especially in my early like feminist inclinations. What is a body? Who cares about a body? A body is a vehicle with which you sort of like go to do more important things, such as like, writing or singing or all of these different things that shouldn't require physical perfection in order to be successful. And so that's sort of like, I think, the place that I formed some of my most like vicious thoughts as a teenager, and projected some of my like resentment culturally onto her. I also really didn't care for the kinds of songs that she was singing. Like, I didn't hear I didn't hear the joy in a lot of them. Like, I didn't hear the fun in some of them. I also didn't hear the defiance in a lot of them. I wasn't hearing that she was actually sort of really like singing different women's experiences into song and doing some really like kind of wonderfully sneaky work in her pop country crossovers. Like I was just sort of like, oh God, well, like this simpering person talking about like men and love. Like, doesn't she understand? She has her own story to tell. I did not hold other artists to that same standard, but I did that to Shania, and it took me like a really long time to sort of like let go of that. And then once I started to sort of try and unpack like what I was holding against her, I was like, oh my God, I am policing her body the same way the patriarchy is policing mine and trying to convince me that, and like, you can be fat and beautiful. You can be thin and beautiful. You can be beautiful any way that you want. You don't have to be beautiful. You can decide that you're going to cultivate ugliness. Like, that's whatever it is that you want to be. Your body is your own, and no one should be telling you
absolutely
how to do anything with it. It took me a long time to understand that bodily autonomy extended to wardrobe and all of that kind of stuff. So I think once I figured that out, or started to figure it out and started to understand it, I was able to sort of examine Shania from a different lens. And I could like, again, starting to like appreciate the whole person instead of just the one aspect of performance that I kept like sort of focusing on was pretty critical.
Yeah, Shania is an interesting person, I think, to talk about, because she really did sort of embody this sexy, siren that we come to expect sort of in the music industry. But at the same time, the way she lived her life was also, I think, very telling about the kind of person she was. You know, I think she's stayed true to being a kind person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think I really appreciated her documentary. I appreciated, I haven't read her memoir in full. I've read a lot of excerpts from it and a lot of interviews that she did around that time. And I think like the ways that she has been forced to sort of live so publicly, because I think she ultimately is actually a deeply private person. And so like with the fallout from her marriage, with like then finding her own love story out of the ashes of the wreckage of that particular situation, her health stuff, and then her comeback sort of being so closely monitored, like as if people were like, now we're gonna find out for sure whether she actually has talent or not, which is like such a gross way to look at, like, she clearly has talent. Anyway,
yes.
But like to truly sort of see her fully like working her way back to herself and seeming to ask herself her own questions of like, well, what do I want? And not having to account for so many other people. Like, if you suddenly have to like raise your siblings and then you are in a marriage that, you know, works on some levels, but in which you are like the power imbalance, I think, was quite clear when she said that she was kind of not allowed in the studios to like make some of those like choices that she would have made. So she's not an equal. Like, she's always sort of like always having to answer to someone or answer for someone. The idea that she just gets to be a person, an autonomous person, you know, I think we're seeing the fruits of that in the music that she's making right now, which I really love.
I love this book, Andrea. It struck a chord on many levels for me, mostly because I think these four women have endured. I mean, we're seeing all of them really just sort of exploding sort of back into pop culture right now, which is wonderful. They're Canadian.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. And they all seem to be really at their core good people, which is nice to celebrate good people.
It feels good. I think what I love the most about sort of reflecting on the last 10 years is seeing the extent to which like culturally as a whole, we're wanting to hear women's stories from their own perspectives in a way that we really haven't before. I hope that makes for a more nuanced sort of like acknowledgement of the things that we have internalized and the way that our culture has been shaped. It's not just about like sort of tearing down stuff. Like it really is about just building something better and more inclusive, and ideally with bodily autonomy for all.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Thank you for spending the last hour with me.
Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Where can people find the book? Because we've just really scratched the surface here. I just want to let people know that, like, this book goes deep on so many levels. You talk about why Celine may not have been as popular today if we were, in a singles era. You go so much deeper on all of these little areas. You go into the albums and the music, and people who really appreciate this music, I think, will appreciate the book. So where can they get it? And then where can they keep up with you?
So you can get it, I think, at any bookstore, actually. I mean, I always admire people who specify or like go to their little independent bookstores in their towns. So I love that. I love people who like get it from the library and ask their library to carry it. I love that. You could also go to my website is theandreawarner.com. It's embarrassing to say the Andrea Warner, but honestly, Andrea Warner was taken. So theandreawarner.com. And you can always find links to the books and stuff there. And, find me on Instagram is probably the place where I'm most social at this point. I have not touched Twitter in a very long time, nor Facebook. So sorry to anyone who wants to hang out there, but that's not going to happen. I'm at Miss Andrea Warner at Instagram. Oh, yeah. And I did narrate the audiobook.
Yeah.
And I'm so proud of it. I'm so proud of it. And I'm just going to humble brag a tiny bit. Actually, it's not humble. I'm just bragging. Audible did choose it as one of their best listens of the year. So I'm very happy about that. So you can find that on Audible. And it's We Ought to Know.
All right. Amazing. I can't wait to see what you do next, Andrea.
Thank you, Candace. That's so lovely. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for reading the book and engaging with it so deeply.
I loved it. Okay. Thank you. If you enjoyed today's episode, please take a moment to share it with someone who'd love it too. And don't forget to hit subscribe to What She Said with me, Candace Sampson, on your favorite podcast app. It's the easiest way to stay connected. Want more? Sign up for my newsletter at whatshesaidtalk.com to get all the latest updates, and let's keep the conversation going on social. You can find What She Said on Facebook and Instagram, and you'll find me on Threads, TikTok, and Blue Sky at Candace Said. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next week.
I'm Jeff Woods, and I'm shining a light on music and the rock stars who make it.
He just was one of those people, he stood out.
He was a magic guy. He really was a magic guy. We all have faults. He had the same amount of faults as we all have.
This was before Led Zeppelin. Robert was full on. I mean, he was Led Zeppelin without the band behind him. He had the hair, the jeans, the whole thing, and he was amazing.
The Records and Rockstars podcast, heard around the world and yours to hear wherever you get podcasts. All the episodes from jeffwoodsradio.com.
I'm Andrea Askowitz.
And I'm Allison Langer. And we are the hosts of Writing Class Radio, a podcast, but we are so much more. We have writing classes. So if you are looking for live online classes where you can join a community, write to a prompt, get feedback, and get better, check out all our classes at writingclassradio.com.
And listen to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts and at writingclassradio.com.
Another Sound Off Media Company podcast.